Hello and welcome to Sci-Fi Christian. I am Bendy Bono, here with the first actual Dante video. Well, I guess second since we had the introduction, but this is the first one where we are actually in the text. So by this point, you should have read through Canto III of the Inferno. If you haven't, that's okay. Plenty of time to catch up. And even if you decide, I'm not going to read the text, still encourage you to stick around for the videos. Hopefully they'll still be helpful and you won't be too lost along the way. But I do absolutely encourage you to dig into the text. I think you'll find it quite beneficial. So I'm going to kind of break this down into three parts, and we'll see how this goes throughout the videos. I think this could be a helpful format. But I'm going to briefly describe what happens in the section that we read for this week. And then next I'm going to throw out a few themes, trivia, just kind of a few things I want to point out in the text. Make sure we're all on the same page with what's going on. And then finally I'll give a few points of devotional reflection for how this text is to guide us through the Lenten and Easter seasons, because that really is the point of this series, right? Okay, so Canto I, we begin in the middle of our life, which most scholars would say means Dante is about 35 years old when this happens, and he finds himself in the woods. And by the way, the entirety of the Divine Comedy takes place over Easter weekend, so this is Good Friday. So our own liturgical format of reading this from the beginning of Lent to the end of Easter is much broader than Dante's, but certainly has a basis in the text where he uses the liturgical format, taking his story from the beginning of Good Friday to Easter Sunday. So he finds himself in the woods, having strayed from the true path. And tries to climb out of them by climbing up this mountain. Can't do it. The three beasts that he encounters there, the she-wolf and the panther and the lion, take him down or threaten him and bar his way from going up. He's unable to pull himself out of this deep, dark, lost, horrible, depressing woods. And so he heads back down the mountain and encounters the poet Virgil, who, if you're not familiar with, is the author of the Aeneid being the epic poem of how the survivors of Troy, led by Aeneas, found the city of Rome. And so Virgil being one of the great poets, and Dante considers him his master, great inspiration for him. And Virgil has been sent to guide Dante through hell, through purgatory, where he will hand him off to Beatrice, who will guide him through paradise. So there are no easy exits, we find. The way forward is to go down into the Inferno. Canto II, Dante and Virgil, we kind of get the backstory of how Virgil was sent to him, sent by Beatrice, an account of the Virgin Mary and St. Lucia requesting her to go down into hell. Virgil is in limbo, which is circle 1, and we'll find out more about that next time, so I won't say too much about it now. And Beatrice visits him. We find out that she, because of the divine grace she is blessed with through this mission, is untouched by the hellfires and unaffected by her surroundings, and she tells Virgil to go and rescue Dante before it is too late. And then finally in Canto III, we enter hell proper. That's right, that inscription that you've probably heard many times before, but maybe didn't know where it came from. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here, as we descend down into hell. Now, we're not actually in any of the circles yet. This is kind of the anti-hell, outside of hell, if you will. Anti meaning A-N-T-E, not A-N-T-I, just to be linguistically clear on that point. And we see the hordes of people waiting, the damned waiting to be ferried by Charon, however you pronounce the great ferryman's name from Greek mythology, into hell. On Virgil and Dante's way to see Charon for themselves, they pass the people who are rejected by both heaven and hell, those who are never took a side in life, including the angels who didn't take a side in Satan's rebellion in heaven. And we see them chasing a banner hither and thither, and with really without purpose or direction. In fact, that's probably the best way to put it. They are utterly directionless. And you'll notice the theme here that will resound throughout the entirety of the Inferno, that when we see a sin and what happens with that sin, we see when we encounter people who are condemned for a certain sin, what we see is an outward representation of what that sin looks like inside. So those who never took a side, they just go here and there, they have no allegiance, they chase a banner that leads nowhere, to nothing, and they are rejected. They're not actually allowed to be in hell. Which might seem like a nice thing, though of course they're being stung by hornets, and it's rather horrible for them as well. In fact, the first circle, limbo, we'll find is actually a fairly decent place, and if they could just get there, they would be much better off. But no, they don't suffer quite as much as some people in the lower circles, but they have a very unpleasant existence. Okay, so a few things to point out then about these first three cantos. Oh, just to finish off that summary. So then after they pass them, they do get to the riverman Charon, and doesn't want to take Dante because he's still alive. Virgil says this is going to happen. God has decreed it. And then there is an earthquake. Dante faints, and we'll catch up with him in Canto IV in the first circle of hell. So, some of the themes, of course, Dante, if you've read John Ciardi's introduction, which I would definitely encourage you to do, you know that he talked about the multiple layers of meaning in Dante's text. So there's the narrative, and then there's the allegorical, and he mentions a couple of others. Well, I think the allegorical side of this should be pretty obvious to us. Of course, Dante says that he finds himself lost from the true way in these deep, dark woods. And, the attempt to climb out by himself is, an act of trying to reach heaven on his own terms. And that, of course, is impossible. So the allegory there is fairly obvious for us. The exact meaning of the three beasts, John Ciardi assigns them a definite meaning in his notes for his text. Different scholars will have some different opinions on that, though John Ciardi tends to be in what he describes them as is in the majority opinion. You'll notice throughout these texts Dante's combination of both mythology and Christian symbolism. From people like the ferryman Charon showing up to some of the different features of hell, right down to the fact that Virgil is his guide. That's something that we'll see a great deal throughout. I already mentioned that when we get into hell, the way that people's punishments are the outward appearance of their sins. There's a couple other things to mention, though, that are worth pointing out when it comes to Canto III. And that's first, that before we feel too sorry for everyone there, Dante makes it very clear that hell is what these people want in a very real sense. That hell is, in fact, for anyone who is in hell, hell is, on one level, what they have been seeking for their entire lives. One exception to this might be those in limbo, but again, we'll get to them next time. He talks about how, what they fear became what they wanted in Canto III. It's a very powerful, very disturbing concept. Very similar to what C.S. Lewis says of why some people are sent to hell in Christian theology. C.S. Lewis has the quote where he says that if we do not eventually say to God, thy will be done, God will eventually say to us, thy will be done. And having God say that to us is effectively a condemnation to hell. If you're a fan of T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, you'll notice the great line of that he quotes from Dante, I did not know death had undone so many. It's always a chilling line for me. I love The Wasteland, and that line just really cuts home to me when I read that poem, and even more here. Alan Middleton's translation, which I'm reading in parallel with John C. Arthur's for these videos, puts it even more disturbingly. He says, "I did not know death had unmade so many," which very well might be closer to what Dante is getting at, because Dante is very influenced by Aquinas, and Aquinas' view of evil and death is is that evil is a sense of nothingness, and so this death literally is unmaking people. To be in hell is a result of indulging in sin to a point where you have so unmade yourself, uncreated yourself, that you can't possibly want what is offered in paradise. And then the punishments in hell themselves are the kind of the culmination of this unmaking. It's a very disturbing, powerful thought. And then one last note here is that you'll notice why Dante has earned the title the Master of the Disgusting. Let me just read this section here of when he sees the, kind of the neutral parties, the unaligned angels and individuals being stung by these hornets or wasps as they chase this banner. He says, "These wretches never born and never dead," which that right there is they're just nothing. The kind of this unwillingness to choose in life just is a great big nothingness. Again, similar to the Aquinas Thomistic view of evil. "These wretches never born and never dead ran naked in a swarm of wasps and hornets that goaded them the more they fled, and made their faces stream with bloody gouts of pus and tears that dribbled to their feet, to be swallowed there by loathsome worms and maggots." If that doesn't make your stomach churn, I'm not sure what will. And Dante, I think it might be a normal reaction to be like, man, does he have to be that graphic? And Dante would say, I think his answer, if he could respond to that question, would be, I might not be graphic enough. He's trying to describe for us what sin is. He's trying to take our face and shove it in to the crap that is sin. And that's the point of the Inferno. Yeah, it is disgusting. You should be repulsed when you read that. And you should be even more repulsed when you realize that there are parts of your life and my life that reflect that sin. Okay? That's what he's getting at. And so you have that, and then you have the great visual image of the hordes of people waiting to board the ferryman. And it's one of those things where I always feel it when I read Dante, that it's essentially unfilmable, if it was ever to be made into a movie, because there's really, the plot is very untraditional. Once we get out of Inferno, the action is really done, at least the action in a typical Hollywood sense. But yet at the same time, it's such a powerfully visual story that you wish somebody would film it. You wish somebody would, give like a Terrence Malick or a Darren Aronofsky $300 million and just let them make a crazy art house version of Dante that would have little to no plot, but just immerse you in the incredible visual tour. Because for as unfilmable as the plot maybe is, the visuals in this just cry out for a modern adaptation with all the CGI and artistic capabilities out there. In any case, okay. How about some Lenten reflections? Well, I have a few thoughts for you here to close out this first video for us. The first is coming from the first canto, where Dante finds himself lost. And he tries to get out, and he can't, and the only way out is through hell. I can't think of a better image to sum up what the beginning of the Lenten season ought to be for us. Dante realizes two things there right from the beginning. Number one, he realizes that he is lost. He has wandered from the true way. And number two, he cannot get out of that himself. And that is, I think, what we're called to see at the beginning of Lent, right? That we have lost our way. We have wandered from the true path in one form or another. And that we can't get out of it ourselves. And that When God's grace comes to us, though, it isn't a snap your fingers and make everything better. God's grace comes to Dante and tells him walk through hell. And in the same way, God's grace comes to us at the beginning of Lent and says, spend the next 6 weeks before Easter contemplating your own personal hell that your sin is creating for yourself. Contemplate what that means and do acts of penance for it. And that's the form that God's grace takes for us in the Lenten season. And it's disturbing and it's unsettling and it's supposed to be. And we're called to take that journey, right? And then we get into Canto II and we have this part where Dante kind of does the whole false humility thing. Well, I don't know if I can do it. And I love the way that Virgil calls him out on it. He says, Virgil's answer to him is, I understand from your words and the look in your eyes, your soul is sunken in that cowardice that bears down many men, turning their course and resolution by imagined perils as his own shadow turns the frightened horse. It's the sense that, and I think this false humility can come either in the, I'm not the great saint, but I'm also not the great sinner. So I'll do Lent on the surface stuff, but I don't want that to penetrate my soul. Or I'm really not up for that deep, intense soul searching and acts of penance that were supposed to take place here in Lent. And Virgil's words to Dante ought to be words to us. That sense of false humility that says, I'm never going to be the great saint. That's just not for me. He says that's cowardice. You are called to sainthood, and you are called to this period of purification, and Lent is the call. Lent is the path you are supposed to walk. And more than that Lent is in some sense about choosing sides, that we don't want to be like this, people being chased here and there in the banner. I think especially in today's world where we want to get along, and that's a good thing, and we want to be respectful of people, and that's a good thing, and not be so opinionated and blockheaded that we shut out other views and all that. But at the same time, the temptation there is that our lives become just kind of this wishy-washy mush where we never actually take that stand for God. We never stake anything on our faith. And Dante very rightly points out the danger of that. And just these pathetic people who are just not even allowed in hell. They don't even have the dignity to get into hell. And they're just being chased to and fro. And Lent is, in some sense, about choosing sides. Not in a way that shuts other people out or that's condemning or judgmental towards others, but in a way that is saying, no, I'm not going to be the wishy-washy person. I'm not going to live a pathetic life. I'm going to choose the side of God. And maybe more accurately for our personal journey, I'm going to choose the path of sainthood. To be a saint. And any lie that we tell ourselves that, we can't do that, that's not for me, we need to go back to Virgil's answer there and get that kind of slap in the face. It says not only is that wrong, not only is that cowardice, but it's actually sloth. It's actually one of the 7 deadly sins. John Ciardi points out in his introduction that's the sin Dante identified with, sloth, not in the sense of, laying on the couch eating potato chips, but in the sense of not having a zeal for God. And that's really what Virgil is calling him out on, and Dante is calling himself out on by putting those words into Virgil's mouth. There's no place for sloth when it comes to the Lenten season. We need to be vigilant. We need to take it seriously and realize that the descent through hell is painful. It's difficult to look your sin in the face. It's hard and humiliating at times to do penance. But that's the grace that God has provided for us. And there isn't a magical snap your fingers and you're just on the other side. I think that's the realization Dante comes away with in these first 3 cantos. And that's the realization we need to have if we're going to have a successful Lent. So there you go. All right. So next time, we're going to be switching to Fridays for the videos. I did Wednesday for this first one for Ash Wednesday. After this, Fridays in Lent, because Friday being the day of penance, that's where we'll gather to continue our penitential journey through the Inferno and later Purgatorio. So a week from this Friday, I believe that's February the 27th, be read through Canto 11. It works out to about one canto a day. You might have to do two on one day or something if you miss a day, or I'm not quite sure how the math works out, but it's not a ton of reading, about eight cantos there. So through Canto 11 by next Friday. I hope you are enjoying it. I certainly am, and I'm looking forward to what comes next for us. But for now, I'm Benny Bono, and this is the Sci-Fi Christian.